Hey, my name is George McCain, and I'm from West Columbia, South Carolina. And my topic is Pedlar in Divinity, George Whitefield and the Great Awakening, 1737 to 1745. We're going to talk about two important areas concerning George Whitefield, his salvation and how Whitefield's ministry changed church. From the book George Whitefield, the first transatlantic revivalist, Arthur Scotland Nigel tells us, when Whitefield was a young man living in England, Charles Wesley gave him a book by Scottish theologian Henry Scouga called The Life of God in the Soul of Man. Whitefield realized that what Scouga described as falsely placed religion described his own religious experience of going to church, not hurting anybody, praying, and giving to the poor. Scouga said, true religion is a union of the soul with God, a real participation of the divine nature, the very image of God drawn upon the soul. Or, in the apostles' phrase, it is Christ formed within us, which is found in Galatians 4:19. George Whitefield prayed, Lord, if I am not a Christian, for Jesus' sake, show me what Christianity is, that I may not be damned in the last. He read further and realized that those who knew anything about real Christianity know that it is a vital reunion with the Son of God, Christ formed in the heart. From that moment, Whitefield knew he was a new creature, a Christian. Whitefield became the forerunner of modern-day mega ministries. He used commercial means to promote his ministries and his revivals. He used a lot of creative advertising. And through these advertising, by the time Whitefield arrived in a town for revival, there were usually thousands of people waiting to hear him preach. He attracted crowds as large as 20,000 people, and he rarely spoke inside a church. His revivals were outside. Ben Franklin said Whitefield had such a strong voice that he could be heard clearly from 400 feet away, and that he believed it possible 30,000 people could actually hear him preach at one time. During the late 18th century, revivalists like Whitefield were considered radical and were called the New Light. There were New Light congregations that separated from the anti-revivalist churches, who were often called the Old Lights. These separatist groups were created by the preaching of ministers like George Whitefield, who spread their message throughout the colonies during the First Great Awakening. These revivals involved various groups, Baptists, Congregationalists, Presbyterians, and even aided in the formation of a new movement called the Methodists. This movement was similar of the Puritans of the late 16th and 17th centuries, who separated from the Church of England because they felt it was not sufficiently reformed or pure. Jerome Mahaffey, in his book, The Accidental Revolution, George Whitefield and the Creation of America, said, Boston was the key to the American colonies. If Whitefield could awaken Boston, then revival would extend throughout the colonies. Old Light clergyman Alexander Garden turned against George Whitefield because of his condemnation of the Old Lights. Whitefield would preach that the Old Lights had never been converted. So Garden published a pamphlet telling people that Whitefield's influence came from power in his voice, not from the content of his message. He asked his readers to compare portions of a printed Whitefield sermon with their memory of hearing it, and if they felt nothing, then their emotion response in person was illegitimate. After Garden's publication, 4,000 people showed up to hear Whitefield. The next day, 6,000 heard him in the morning and 8,000 in the afternoon. And then that following Sunday, 15,000 people showed up to hear George Whitefield preach. George Whitefield was a great revivalist, had a great voice, and used a lot of creative advertising to promote his revivals throughout the colonies. This was during the time when there was no telephone, no internet, no modern roads, no cars, no planes, no trains. Yet he traveled up and down the East Coast preaching to thousands of people. And they flocked out to hear him. And he led a lot of people to the Lord, and he pretty well changed the way church is today.